So the title of my presentation is ABF, NAE, What's It to Me? And ABF is antibiotic free. NAE is no antibiotics ever. And what's it to me? And me from different perspectives. I want to talk about me from the consumer side. So Jim, I'm going to play off some of the things that you said and build on that just a bit. So we'll talk about it from the consumer side, but we'll also talk about it from the animal side. And in the last 11 months that I've been with Phibro, I've learned an awful lot about the poultry industry, which is about this much in a C. But I have learned quite a bit, especially broilers, and I'll touch just a little bit on pigs. Relying on science alone won't change widely held opinions and beliefs. This kills me, by the way. Remember, I am a veterinarian. It kills me. It will not change widely held. Today, the consumer is not asking if we can use antibiotics. That's a science question, right? We answer that, yes, we can. Science says we can. They're asking instead, should we use the antibiotics? That's a very different question, and it requires a very different answer. That's an ethical question, and it requires us to share our values. I'm constantly saying, lead with your values, because they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And until we make that connection from that ethical value sort of standpoint, we do not have the permission to talk about the science. We do not have the permission. So what drives consumer trust? And you're going to see lots of, on the consumer side, you're going to see quite a few Center for Food Integrity slides. I do have the wonderful opportunity to work pretty closely with them in what I do. And their research shows that shared values are 3 to 5 times more important in building trust than demonstrating competence. And competence is skills and abilities. 3 to 5 times shared values. That's the most important thing. Now, by the way, I'm not saying throw the science baby out with the bathwater. We still need to use science. We just don't lead with it. We lead with those shared values, follow up with some of the science. Consumer conundrum. They're getting lots of information. You've seen some of these slides. Jim, thanks for teeing these up for me. If farm animals, and this is CFI's research. They usually, every year, they survey about 2,000 or so participants. The participants mirror the demographics of the U.S., and they're kind of scattered throughout the U.S. And so here's a statement, and each individual was asked to rate their agreement with each of these statements. If farm animals are treated decently and humanely, I have no problem consuming meat, milk, and eggs. And you can see that 60% in 2015, and you can see the trends. I'm not going to go over all this, but you can see 60% strongly agree with that statement. 35% kind of middle of the road, and only 6% strongly disagree in the red. Which kind of makes sense, because that's generally about the percentage of folks that don't consume meat, milk, and eggs, are vegan or vegetarian. But then the next question, U.S. meat is derived from humanely treated animals. And you'll see that only 25% strongly agree, 57%, much larger kind of middle there, and 19% strongly disagree. So what this tells me is they want their meat, milk, and eggs. They're just not sure that we're doing what's right on the farm. That's what this tells me. And then to take it a step further, I would support a law in my state to ensure the humane treatment of farm animals. 53%, so over half the people strongly agree with that. 40% middle of the road, only 7% strongly disagree. This is huge. That tells me we are moving from having that social license, that ability to operate with minimalized formal restrictions, to social control, which is legislation, it's rules, it's regulations, it's ordinances, you name it. How do we overcome that? The answer? We talked a little bit about it earlier, and that's transparency. Consumers not only want transparency, they expect it. So what do I mean by transparency? Well, first of all, it's the key to building consumer trust. We need to be open and honest about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I like this definition of transparency. It can be rationally defined as truthful information That makes sense. This is the fun part. But perhaps more importantly, it translates to an emotional feeling of confidence. Whoa, I said emotions here. Has agriculture, animal agriculture especially, been very good at that emotional kind of piece? How about the activists? Are they good at that emotional sort of piece? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think we're getting better in animal agriculture. We've come a long way. We've come a long way. So let's look at, and this is just CFI's, this year's research, so 2015. And looking at several different areas. So we're looking at food safety, impacts of food on health, treatment of animals, labor and human rights, business ethics, and environmental stewardship. Half to nearly 2/3 strongly agree that transparency about these things builds trust with food. So 56% on treatment of animals agree that if we're transparent and talking about what we do and how we do it, especially in a way that resonates with them, it builds trust. The other interesting, and this part, this fascinates me truly. Consumers primarily hold food companies responsible for transparency. Even when it comes to the treatment of animals, you can see, whoops, that got lost there, but it's not there, but obviously it's over 50%, I think. Quick addition, about 49%. Thank you. 49%. That's huge. So when you're looking at who do the consumers hold responsible for transparency, and you probably can't read this, so let me help you. Gold is food companies, this greenish color is farmers, the blue is grocery stores, and the silver color, clear over on the end, is restaurants. Food companies at that 49%. 30% is people taking care of those animals every day, not being held quite as responsible for transparency. I find that fascinating. But it also explains why so much pressure is being put on the companies. Lots of pressure being put on the companies. We'll talk about that a little more. Someone asked, and this was an aided survey, by the way, and so they had 16 choices for them to rank. What are the practices that are most important to you regarding transparency? And so 4 things floated to the top here. And one is genetically modified, using genetically modified organisms on the product package, so information there. Preservatives on the nutrition label. Supplemental hormones on the company website. Guess what? Antibiotics on the company website. They don't necessarily want it on the label. They're not saying that. They want to know what we're doing and why we're doing it that way. So why all the concern? Well, I think we all know that antibiotic resistance is a real threat. I think we all know that. And it's related to meat. And whenever anything is related to meat or to food in general, it becomes personal to people, because food is very personal, and some would even say intimate. We feed it to our families. And there is some misinformation. There are a lot of folks out there, especially consumers, that get resistance and residue mixed up. And believe it or not, I've even sat in some of the poultry companies' boardrooms and heard their retail sales folks confuse the two. So we need to do a little bit better job, I think, talking about those two things very separately. Obviously, antibiotic resistance, antibiotic use, very complex subject, very complex. And I heard a very wise man say, if you think you understand antimicrobial resistance, someone didn't explain it to you correctly. It's very complicated. The other piece of that is consumers use them, and so they're very concerned that they might not be available to them. And I think this bottom one is very key. Most consumers don't know how or why we use antibiotics in animal agriculture. And they also don't get that connection between animal care and antibiotic use. It's that prevention of animal suffering, or the relief of animal suffering in the control, so prevention, control, and treatment of disease. And we need to help them make that connection. And we have a perfect opportunity. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite past university presidents. Of course, it's the Ohio State University. If you know me, you already knew that. But Dr. Gordon Gee, I had the opportunity to see him speak several times, and I love this quote. I heard him say this, and I've heard him say it a couple times, and I love this quote. In this time of enormous change and challenge comes enormous opportunity. And I think we can all agree that both animal care and antibiotic use has been a challenge for us in animal agriculture. And there are definitely some changes coming, especially with antibiotic use. But I think with that comes an enormous opportunity. And I think there's a couple of those opportunities. And one of those is we need to talk about the changes that are coming. We need to talk about them and frame them in an animal care kind of way. Research tells us that trust in veterinarians especially, and I know there's quite a few in the room, is high. It is high. And consumers want information. You just saw the research, the social science that said consumers want information. We've got some changes here coming January 1st. We're increasing veterinary oversight, and we're phasing out the use of growth promotion for antibiotics that are important to human medicine. That is huge, folks. It is huge. And we have an opportunity in the next 8 months to talk about that and to let folks know that we are making changes. We're looking to improve. We want to make sure we're doing our part in animal agriculture to ensure the responsible use of antibiotics, but also to make sure that we're minimizing any potential impact on antibiotic resistance. It's a good opportunity and we need to take it. But the other opportunity is to reframe the conversation about antibiotic use in animal ag. And that is not talk about it from an economic standpoint, which we're really good at. And because it's easy, numbers talk, right? Well, we need to talk about it in terms of societal benefits. What does it mean to the animal? What does it mean to the farmer? One of those messages is treating animals to prevent or relieve animal suffering is absolutely the right thing to do. And we need to talk about it just like that. I think we have a great story to tell. We just have to tell it like that. And I think the other thing is, a lot of focus not only on animal care, but lots of focus on sustainability. I think we need to talk about responsible use as having the benefit of reducing the amount of bacteria going into the harvest facility. But I think we also need to talk about it in terms of carbon footprint. Healthy animals, less food. They need less food. We don't need as much space to grow it on, less resources, and therefore a smaller carbon footprint. So we can talk about it in those terms also. We have a wonderful opportunity in the U.S. to have this vast array of food choices, and I love it. I love the idea that there are companies and there are farmers that have niche markets. I love that. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for everyone. And if people feel better about eating antibiotic-free meat, quote unquote, by all means, go for it. Go for it if you feel better. Because after all, we want everybody to be happy with the selection of food that they choose. But many consumers are also very comfortable eating conventionally raised food. Put the slide in here for a reason. Well, it looked easy when the dang horse did it. I will tell you, there are some companies out there that are really good at antibiotic-free or no antibiotics ever. They've been doing this a long time. They've really perfected this and are doing a very, very nice job. So I want to make it clear that I'm not bashing antibiotic-free, but I think we have to be very, very aware of unintended consequences. And I think those unintended consequences are even greater when it's being compressed into a really short amount of time to change management practices and how we do things on the farm. So I want to talk about some of those unintended consequences. And I always get a little bit scared when I agree with the ASPCA and some of those other groups. But this is a time when I actually agree with ASPCA. And that's the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And they agree there'd be serious consequences if animal antibiotics with crossover to human antibiotics are pulled from veterinarians' toolkits. We know as veterinarians, as animal health folks, there are lots of things in our toolkit: vaccination, proper nutrition, ventilation, biosecurity, sanitation, the list goes on. But antibiotics is also one of those, and that's something we don't want to lose. And I like this quote, too, from an ASPCA official. If animal welfare is not addressed in conjunction with pulling back the drugs, this would actually be a very dangerous move for birds and ultimately for consumers. We'll talk about that just a bit more. And some of that is because there are certain poultry diseases, a couple examples, E. coli and fowl cholera, that the only FDA-approved treatments are those treatments that are important to humans. So those antibiotics. AAPPP, so American Association of Avian Pathologists, and the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, both have issued statements. One at the end of February, I think one just came out in March, so fairly new statements, a little bit of a white paper. And here's a couple quotes. The first one is from AAPP, so that's the avian pathologists. And they say, animal welfare is enhanced because of sick animals being adequately treated to decrease mortality and morbidity, as well as risk of disease transmission. And I think AASV sums it up really, really well when they say marketing programs should not prevent a farmer from treating or preventing illness. I think that's really, really key. And as more companies go fully 100% antibiotic-free or no antibiotics ever, and understand there's a lot of poultry, especially broiler companies out there that have a percentage, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 25% of their production is antibiotic-free. And so there's advantages to that. But as more and more go 100% free, there's really three options. When an animal, birds in this case, get sick with a bacterial infection, there's three options. Keep calm, we'll get to the carrion part in just a minute. So the first option, treat the birds, right? They're sick. That's what we're supposed to do. Treat the birds. But if you're 100% antibiotic free, you're going to need to divert that production somewhere else. Well, that sounds good. That sounds simple. Maybe not so much. I know I've got somebody from Genio, and maybe we can talk just a bit more about that. That is a little difficult, because think about it, at the processing plant, now, you're expecting these birds in, and now you've got to not only market them differently, so find a different buyer, but now you also potentially have to package them differently or label them differently. That's hard. It becomes even more complicated in Canada, and I spent a little bit of time, about a week in Canada a few weeks ago, and talked with a lot of folks there. And I learned a lot. They have something called supply management system. And some of you may well know that's a quota system. And they also, and the farmers own the quota, the folks growing the birds, they'll actually have contracts with the harvest plant or the processing plants. And so it becomes even more complicated there, because then they have to break that contract to try and take them somewhere else. That's problematic. That's hard to do. So option 2, I'm going to try not to get mad here, is withhold treatment and sell those that don't die. I'm sorry. I took an oath that said I wouldn't do that. Withhold treatment and sell those that don't die. And that creates some other issues. So you're marketing those that live. It does a couple things. One, studies show that increases your condemnation rate. The other issue is that also increases the pathology in the processing plant. When you've got more pathology, whether it's irosacculitis or adhesions, whatever's going on, what happens? The potential for more food processing errors. And when we have more food processing errors, we're at greater risk for food safety issues. What are we doing? And then the third, and this is the carrion part, dig a hole. You have no way to market them. And you don't want them to suffer through the disease. So you euthanize them. What a waste of animal life. And what a waste of animal protein. I think this sums it up well. I sat with a fella who raises some turkeys, and he's a contract grower. And his company sells to Subway, and as you know, Subway has gone essentially antibiotic-free. And he was telling me about this, and I could see a little bit of stress on his face, and I wish you could have seen his face, because you could tell he was a little bit frustrated. And I like this quote, because I think he summed it up really, really well here. The company wants antibiotic-free, and they're willing to pay for it. But when these birds have E. coli, I have to watch a percentage of them die. Tell me how that's okay. Now, I understand, as a livestock producer, sometimes you do absolutely everything right. You vaccinated, you've got the nutrition, ventilation, all those things you've done perfectly right, and sometimes Mother Nature stops. And it's our responsibility as caretakers of those animals and as veterinarians to make sure that we're relieving or preventing that animal suffering. I'm not sure we're doing that here. I think that's a pitfall. And while I was in Canada, I was also talking with a company that raises for McDonald's. And one of the things they said is they haven't figured this out yet. They don't know how they're going to market birds because McDonald's has already said they won't take them. Now, this is Canada. A little different here. But this is Canada. We need to figure this out pretty darn quick because there are serious animal welfare implications here. It's part of my job. So we're working on education and awareness of these issues with food companies, poultry companies especially, stakeholders, and also with consumers. That's why you see those videos. We absolutely support the responsible use, and responsible use is key. So as little as possible, but as much as necessary. Responsible use to keep animals healthy, which is the right thing to do. So some resources for you, as you're out there on the front lines also. Some resources. And we have a couple different websites on antibiotics. The first one is exploreanimalhealth.org. By the way, there are handouts at the outside of the room, and there's a brochure for the top 2 websites. These are Phibro websites. I'll be very transparent about that. Explore Animal Health is really for the food system. So it's folks like you that need to be having these conversations with other people, and it really helps you engage in the conversation about animal antibiotics. It kind of guides you through that a bit. Lots of resources there also. Animalantibiotics.org, on the other hand, that is a consumer website. So it's very consumer-based. That's where you'll find, we actually have 3 videos. That's the how and why we use antibiotics, the one you saw a little bit earlier. We have one on antibiotic resistance, and we also have one on antibiotic residue. And you can find those under the Meet the Veterinarian, and it's under my blog. So if you want to check those videos out, they're there. If you want a copy of them, come see me. I'll hand them to you today. But there are several handouts as well as some fact sheets and Q&As out there that you might be able to utilize. If nothing else, to help give you an idea of how you can make the connection and to make those value-based statements. And then we also, at Phibro, help sponsor bestfoodfacts.org, one of my favorite websites. It's CFI's website, Center for Food Integrity. They do a really nice job at answering questions, and we help sponsor their antibiotics. It's a 4-part series on antibiotics, so you might want to check that one out as well.